I'd like to thank everybody for coming today on this. Oh, we're getting a little bit of echo here. Yeah. I think that's better. Yeah. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. There are many, many other things going on today, and we're pleased that you came to share your time with us. This is rather unusual. I remember a year ago, it seemed like it was so odd because we had some of our volunteers working the gun show during our own meeting. Well, this year we've got 5 different venues we're covering at the same time as this meeting. So if you're wondering, geez, where are all the regulars? They're at the Medina Gun Show, or they're at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, they're on the square, a couple others that I don't remember right offhand. They're all over the place. And Nancy just left to do her part with the Marine Corps League, so very, very busy weekend. We're glad you came. Since nobody is here to speak to the Healthcare Freedom Amendment, that's where most of them are working, let me just speak to that. I've been tracking it very closely since the snow finally stopped and then the rain began. And projecting the trend on signature collection, we are right on or a little bit ahead of schedule to meet the goal to turn into the Secretary of State. So that's looking very positive. In fact, the rate of production is continuing to increase. We're at 360,000 now. The question is no longer whether or not we will be able to turn in enough signatures to put that on the ballot, but how soon we'll be done. So that's very good news. Let's see here. Nancy Notarian had a petition for people to sign to encourage Alan West to run for president. He's one of many candidates that I really like. We know in the end we have to have just one, right? But I think he's one of those we'd like to take a look at. So encourage you to take a look at that. And before we get too much farther, why don't we go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's take a moment for invocation. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather again with our friends and neighbors to perform an act of stewardship toward this wonderful nation you have created us. We are in a time of great trouble. We are comforted that you are with us and all of the other children of God that you have created to be around us. Give us the strength, the courage, and the determination to continue with this mission that you've put before us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Do we have any new guests today?
We do.
See,
I know we have one.
We have one. Uh-oh, you're stuck. Great. I'm glad you could join us. They do call us Medina County friends and neighbors, so don't mind us if we get a little friendly. Don't go too far with that, Sylvia. No, I don't even want to deal with that. Well, at least this time they're making a big fuss about a Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, usually they don't fuss about it until it's a Republican, but this time they're fussing about a Democrat.
I guess he's got a great slideshow.
Somebody could schedule that. I might have another meeting I need to attend when that happens.
I get you quickly.
It's X-rated, not family approved.
Okay.
I haven't seen it.
All right. Well, I'm going to suspend with some of the usual formalities about what we are and what we're like and all that kind of stuff. I think our guests can see we're not all serious, and that we do allow a variety of views to be expressed. Not all of which are shared by the management. Let's see, Nancy, you have not been here for a while.
It's like the bad kid come back.
Well, I'm sure glad you're back.
Welcome. She's busy. We're on the campaign trail.
You're on the campaign trail. Well, I'll tell you, we got so much on the agenda this year. It's just absolutely insane. We got the healthcare freedom amendment, and then there's this big effort coming up to try to convince the public that the CASIC budget, including the Senate Bill 5, is a good idea. And then we're going to be hitting the schools with our Constitution Day again this year, and probably spreading that out through many other districts across the state, because we have other people wanting to do what we did last year. And then there's the November election, okay, and we have to pay attention to what's going on locally, as well as all the referendums, etc. So it's just a non-stop year. You take a look at 2011 midterm year, you say, nothing going on, we can all take a break. Wrong. This is being, we're working harder this year than we were last year, and that's good. There's a sign outside the Marine Corps base in California, 1st Marine Division, and it says, the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. Well, we're there right now. We're sweating now so that we win more next year. All right, Nancy, did you have any announcements you wanted to make to us? Anything you wanted to say? Or you just...
You don't want a campaign speech, so.
Okay. Well, we're all going to vote for you anyway, right? Okay. Dick, I see you here. Anything on the agriculture front?
No, I think the bill is with the governor right now.
Okay.
For his signature.
Well, all right. Well, without further ado then, everybody came here to... Oh, Michelle. Would you like to say anything? I see you're here and you got some great books back there, by the way.
Oh, yes, I do. Just to talk about the House Sovereignty Amendment, keeping it low-key for now, because where it gets going with the Healthcare Freedom Amendment. But as soon as that's done, we've got more petitions for you. We need your support. We need to turn back now. The House Sovereignty Amendment, in my opinion, does more than just look at healthcare. We're talking about turning back the EPA and a lot of things that we need to do. I don't want to go on too much. We've got petitions for you from circulating, the Healthcare Freedom Amendment petitions. I've got packets for you can take with if you would so kindly do. We'd appreciate it. We're looking to get on the ballot next year. So it won't be easy next year either, 2012, but we could use your help. And if there's any books that would interest you in the back, we've got a couple of the NCCS books and Preach for Jekyll Island. We've got the 5th edition of that. So please take a look on the way out. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, Sylvia.
I know our players, are we doing anything to stand up for Israel? Stand up for Israel?
Essentially what we're doing is promoting other events that identify the problem with radical Islam, the threat there, etc. That's about as much as there is to be done right now, I think. So the answer is yes, but we're always looking for people that have more bandwidth in case we can do more. It's really amazing because last year the focus was slamming on the brakes on a government out of control. We did that with the House. We neutralized the Senate. The Supreme Court is kind of hung out there in relative balance. But if you look at the executive branch of our government, they are just as wild as a March hare. It's absolutely crazy. This thing going on in Libya, crazy, just insane. The EPA, crazy. You just go right through the alphabet soup and you wouldn't believe it. Well, I guess that's what 2012 is for. We'll fix that. Anyway, yes?
What's going on with the precinct
It's not a, sure.
Do you want me to, I can do it now. And this is going to be across every county in Ohio. Right now, we're waiting for, we know that we're going to lose 2 U.S. House of Representatives seats. And the apportionment board, which fortunately is made up of Republicans down in the state, has to redo, I'm sorry. Oh, it's, the state of Ohio, counties, each county is going to, well, let me go back and talk about the reapportionment board. I'm not a Republican. But the way it's set up, it's actually in the Ohio Revised Code, the Republicans actually will be doing the reapportionment. That has to be done the month of September. We know that Ohio's going to lose 2 U.S. House of Representatives seats. And that has to be taken care of the month of September. Then in October, the local boards of election have to totally redo precincts, wards in their counties based on information, because some areas got larger, some areas get smaller. Those precincts have to be redistributed. Forget it, that word. Yeah, that word. Yes, thank you. Gotta get the right emphasis. The emphasis on the right syllable there. Then finally, so to answer your question, we won't have the ability to actually go out and get our petition signed to run for Central Committee until the month of November. So it is going to be a rush, and I know we're like a little short in the room today, so put on anybody that's planning on running for their Central Committee, whether it's whatever county it is, it's going to be the month of November, and your petitions will be due on December 7th. But we can't do anything. I don't even know what precinct I'm going to be living in till November 1st. So I've always been a precinct committeeman. I'm going to be in a totally different precinct. I'm not going to get my signatures now, because even if I'm in the same precinct, the signatures I get might not be in my precinct. So I have to wait till November too. So that's why you haven't heard that much about it. But I know that Jim and others, we all have our lists, and we're ready to get those people kicked in the rear end on November 1 to go out and get signatures. And that would be the same for you if you're in any other county.
Thanks, Nancy. Just one of many things that are still up in the air, so we'll be back in touch on that one. Anyway, I don't need both microphones. I think everybody here is looking forward to hearing from Robert Owens talking about defending liberty. Robert is definitely an expert on the subject. We've had the opportunity to hear from him before. As you can tell, Robert, your audience is actually bigger than the people in this room today. So it's always a pleasure to see a true patriot like Robert come up and speak so eloquently and give us new information. Robert, we got 45 minutes or so. That's all yours, and have at it.
Thank you all for having me back. Thank you all for the wonderful support that you gave my campaign this past November. And I really do want to thank Lisa and Jim Woods for doing a fantastic job. I know that they organized a Tea Party before there was such a thing as a Tea Party. And that level of activism is so critical in our nation as we're going forward. We're going to address that very specifically. Let me begin by saying, or asking, has anybody ever here served on grand jury? All right, we've got a couple folks here. Do you remember when you served on grand jury, what the threshold of evidence you were looking for, or the prosecutor told you to look for in terms of whether you were going to indict somebody for a serious crime or not? You guys remember what that was? Does the term probable cause ring a bell? That's right. Today we're going to be looking at some evidence about what's going on in our country, and specifically who's driving it and why they're driving it. And I'm going to ask you, as we go through the information today, it's a very cursory view because we've got limited time, to put on your hat as though you were a grand juror and consider this evidence from the standpoint of, all right, is there probable cause to have concern, to drive us to look further into the issue? And if the answer is yes, then when you leave here today, take off your grand juror hat, and here I'm going to encourage you to put on that hat of, I'm a defense attorney trying to prove everything wrong. Because if you start looking into this evidence, I think that's really where you become invested in exactly what's happening to our country, who's driving it, and why they're driving it. And that's going to be our topic of discussion as we go forward today. Now, first, let me explain why we're having this exercise. And I'm going to do this in the context of bringing up a famous Chinese military tactician by the name of Sun Tzu. Some of you might be familiar with one of his works called The Art of War. The Art of War has been around for thousands of years. It has been adapted for military use, for sure, for business, for professional sports. This is taught at all the service academies, and it is a mainstay of military, sort of military 101 basic thought. Now, from The Art of War, Sun Tzu has a number of real nuggets of wisdom, but I'm going to focus on two specific things. First of all, Sun Tzu says, if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. But if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And again, examine this logic. Right? If you don't know anything about the Constitution, and you don't know anything about who's driving to destroy the Constitution, you're lost and it's hopeless. Now, I know in a group like this, especially with Jim and Lisa's leadership, this is a group that understands the Constitution, that understands some of the basics of what it means to live in the American system of government. But what we have to do, and the focus that we're going to have today, is examining who is the enemy. Because if we just understand what the Constitution is, and we don't understand who's actively opposing the Constitution, this is going to be a 50-50 proposition at best for us to actually make progress. And I think what you'll see in our country is that even though there has been a resurgence of people talking about the Constitution, it still doesn't change the fact that, for example, there was a total cave-in in Congress on the budget for 2011. We're almost certainly going to see a total cave-in in Congress on the debt ceiling coming up here shortly. And so if we don't understand who's behind that and who's driving it, we're really going to be at a disadvantage. And that's why we're focusing on who is the enemy today. Because if you know the enemy, you've got a significant advantage. Second thing I wanted to point out from Sun Tzu is that all warfare is based upon deception. Your true enemy is not going to come up and introduce themselves as your enemy. They, in fact, are going to be telling you they are your friend. They are going to be giving you all sorts of sweet nothings in your ear so that you think, aha, here's who I want to support. But in fact, that is not who you want to support. So we're going to focus on that and understand that issue. Now, I'm a trial lawyer. I'm a former prosecutor. And so for me, this is not just throwing out naked allegations, but we have to examine evidence. And some of the evidence that we're going to look at today are confessions of the perpetrators, statements from friends and defectors of the perpetrators, a review of enemy action and infiltration into government, and then research from defenders of our republic. In this regard, again, this is going to be a very cursory review because we have limited time, and I'm going to give you at the end some great references for further research that are well documented so you can take this the next step further. First of all, let's talk about defending the American Republic so we can at least lay down a baseline understanding of what it is we're trying to defend. We understand here in this room that the United States is a republic and not a democracy. Democracy is tyranny of the masses. But a republic says this is the rule of law, and government is strictly limited because it has few and defined powers. Now again, in this room, we all know that to be the case, but of course that begs the question, how did we get so far removed from that foundation? Because I think you could make a real good argument that as a matter of actual fact, what we have is not a republic right now, we have a democracy. We have a president that has unlimited powers that are not defined. Well, he can declare war in Libya, start committing our troops there, and do so many other things that we're seeing in this administration that go far out and beyond the scope of the Constitution, not the least of which is Obamacare, but certainly prominent among them. So in answer to this question, I think there's really three schools of thought on this issue. First is this concept of evolutionary history. Now this is a Marxist concept. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. In fact, we're going to spend very little time on this, only to point out that Cleon Skousen, some of you may have read 5,000 Year Leap, or there's some folks that have that book, have read that book. Cleon Skousen, the author of that, wrote a number of other books. One of them was called The Naked Communist, in which he goes into this issue of evolutionary history. I'm going to dismiss it now here today as Marxist junk, but you know, we could have a 45-minute discussion just on that topic, but let me just refer you to a source on that. We could have mistakes happen. Maybe what we have are good people in government that mean very well. If you listen to their rhetoric, they obviously seem to understand what they're supposed to be doing, but gosh darn it, maybe they just make some mistakes. And that's how we've gotten so far off. Well, I mean, that's one school of thought. We'll address that a little bit more. But I'm going to suggest to you today that the evidence is going to point to this concept: purposeful design. That what we have are people in government that are specifically set out to destroy the United States Constitution, to destroy the middle class of the United States, and to plunge us into a socialist tyranny. And that's the evidence we're going to spend the most time talking about. Now, let me give you an example of purposeful design that's in the news today to put this in proper context. There is a project by the federal government called Project Gunrunner. Some of you may have seen this in the news, and essentially this is the concept that's going on right now. Federal agents with the BATFE are conducting strawman purchases of assault rifles and even up to 50 caliber guns. They are then selling these to Mexican drug lords. This has obviously resulted in a significant increase in gun violence. And the goal here is to create this public opinion, to mold public opinion, to get everybody to say, oh geez, there's so much gun violence, we have to do something about it. And of course now the government has some legitimate cover to come in and say, well, what we need is increased gun laws. Right? This is an example of creating the poison and the antidote in the same laboratory. And that's exactly what's happening so often throughout our government. We're going to see this theme repeated over and over and over again in energy and healthcare and all these kinds of situations. But, you know, of course, mistakes, maybe it's mistakes, maybe that's what the situation is. And, you know, before we dismiss it, let's take a look at observations of people that have been in high government office and see what their thoughts are on the situation. This is James Forrestal. He was actually the first Secretary of Defense. Before him, it was called Secretary of War. And here's what he had to say about the situation. He said, "These men are not incompetent or stupid. They are crafty and brilliant. Consistency has never been a mark of stupidity. If they were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor." And consider the logic that Forrestal is employing here. What we have seen is a consistent, progressive push towards socialism over the last 100 years. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. Right? The EPA, we're all talking about how horrible the EPA is. Does anybody remember what president introduced the EPA? Richard Nixon, a Republican. Right? So what we see over and over again is it doesn't matter which party is in office. There is still this progressive push. And this is what Forrestal is talking about here. So let's take a look at the people behind the scenes that are calling the shots. And you know, as a prosecutor, I can tell you confessions of perpetrators is the main reason people are in jail today. Pride and ego is the big driver on this issue, because criminals love to talk about how big and important they are. There is, I would suggest to you, no bigger criminal in the United States today than this man, David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank. Now, he wrote an autobiography in 2002 called Memoirs. That's a photo of Mr. Rockefeller holding his book. And in this book, he says, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. Now, interestingly, shortly after he wrote this book, he did an interview with Charlie Rose on PBS. Now, David Rockefeller is a former chairman of a group called the Council on Foreign Relations.